This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning, Treasure Coast and beyond, sometimes far beyond. I know we have some listeners in Jupiter, and we all know that's another planet. Today is another edition of Ask a Lawyer. And we're going to depart from our usual format, although you may still call me with any questions you may have at 340-1590.
So do you think Robert Kraft is listening to you in Jupiter? Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't think Robert Kraft...
bad joke.
I don't think...
Okay.
He's probably getting a massage.
Oh, no. Okay.
Maybe we'll have a report issued on him as well.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Today, as with a lot of other news outlets, we're going to talk about the Mueller report. But
Who?
Mr. Mueller, whatever his name is, who's been very busy for a couple of years, investigating a whole host of people, including the president, all about Russia and everything else under the sun. Now, the difference here, and I welcome your calls on this, one way or the other. The difference here, I'm told on Facebook Live that the sound is going in and out. I tell you. The difference here is that we're not going to discuss it from a partisan viewpoint. If you've listened to the show before, you know my viewpoint. I can't stand the guy in the White House. But we're not going to discuss it from that perspective. We're going to try to discuss, and we'll never get through the whole thing today like we never do with anything. We're going to try to discuss it strictly from a nonpartisan constitutional perspective and see where we come. The first thing I want to talk about is the determination that a sitting president may not be indicted while in office. And where did Robert Mueller come up with that in his report, which precludes any determination as to whether President Trump or any president has engaged in criminal conduct? The second thing I want to talk about is, should a sitting president be subject to indictment? And if so, under what conditions? That's an interesting question.
Well, if he or she did something wrong, they should be.
Well, then that completely obliterates the first part of this show, which is a sitting president is not subject to indictment. And we're going to talk about why and whether it makes sense and whether or not, instead of having a binary answer to this, no. The options were yes or no. The answer is no. Department of Justice has a opinion, long-standing, sitting president can't be indicted. It's a political question for Congress and impeachment. Robert Mueller decided to accept that, and his report is premised upon it. So he does not come to conclusions about criminality. But the second question then becomes, should a president, and I'm not just talking about President Trump, folks. That's why I'm saying I'm trying to do this from a nonpartisan perspective. Should a sitting president ever be subject to indictment? And hopefully we get to that because it's a really fascinating topic. The third thing, which I doubt we'll get to today, but perhaps in a week or two, is, does Congress have the power to regulate obstruction of justice as an offense that the president could be guilty of? Or is that invading upon his province under separation of powers? In other words, if the president does something otherwise permissible, like give a pardon, we've all heard that the pardon clause is unconditional. President gives it, that's it. That's true. But assuming the president now exercises his lawful constitutional prerogative to grant a pardon, can Congress make a determination that that's still obstruction of justice? when he's doing something lawful. And there's a lot of interesting issues tied in there. And again, please, I am trying for these purposes not to talk about President Trump. I think these are issues that are truly fascinating from a legal constitutional perspective, and ones that we really should consider, because who knows who the next president will be, the president after that, the president in 50 years. These are issues that have come up now, and we probably should address them.
Well, yeah, and you know that the legal eagles are still going over all the Watergate stuff. So this is something, as you just said, that we may be talking about for the next 50 years.
That's right. And sometimes a fresh perspective, some little schmagegi lawyer in WPSL in Port St. Lucie, maybe I have a slightly different perspective. Going from the framework of the Mueller report, which is where we're really going to focus on. So let's start with the initial question. And please give us a call at 340-1590. If nobody calls, it is impossible that you don't have opinions on this topic. You are asleep and not human if you don't have opinions on this topic. I'm telling you. So I hope you'll call. The first thing is, may a sitting president be subject to indictment? And the Mueller report begins with the premise that he may not, he or she. A sitting president may not be subject to indictment while in office. Why? In the report on page 1 of volume 2. See, I didn't read the whole thing, but I've gone through it. He says the Office of Legal Counsel, that's within the Department of Justice, has issued an opinion finding that the indictment or criminal prosecution of a sitting president would impermissibly undermine the capacity of the executive branch to perform its constitutionally assigned functions in violation of the constitutional separation of powers. And for that reason, the Department of Justice said, no, a sitting president can't be indicted. But let's take it a little bit further. In the Mueller report, again, volume 2, page 1, Mueller talks about that legal counsel opinion, and he says, given the role of the special counsel as an attorney in the Department of Justice and the framework of the special counsel regulations, this office accepted OLC, Office of Legal Counsel's legal conclusion for the purpose of exercising prosecutorial jurisdiction. In other words, whether Mueller himself agrees or disagrees about whether or not a sitting president can be indicted, he says, I am an attorney of the Department of Justice. I must accept the Department of Justice's determination that a sitting president may not be indicted, and therefore my report is being written from this initial premise. Now, what does that mean? What's the consequence of that? He also, before we go into the consequence of that, he says, well, here's another reason that we should not indict a sitting president. He says, apart from the Office of Legal Counsel's constitutional view, we recognize that a federal criminal accusation against a sitting president would place burdens on the president's capacity to govern and potentially preempt constitutional processes for addressing presidential misconduct. Now, he means impeachment. So what Mueller is saying is, even separated from the decision of Office of Legal Counsel, Mueller, conclude that even accusing a president of criminal conduct may interfere with his ability to do his constitutionally mandated job. And therefore, we're not going to go there. So he goes on and says, fairness concerns counseled against potentially reaching the judgment when no charges can be brought. The ordinary means for an individual to respond to an accusation is through a speedy and public trial, with all the procedural protections that surround a criminal case. An individual who believes he was wrongfully accused, like Robert Kraft, can use that process to seek to clear his name. In contrast, a prosecutor's judgment that crimes were committed, but that no charges will be brought, place here, that no charges will be brought, affords no such adversarial opportunity for public name clearing before an impartial adjudicator. So in other words, if, as Mueller does, we accept the premise that a sitting president cannot be indicted, then I am not going to go and make any determinations as to whether he did or did not engage in criminal conduct. Because if I say I believe he engaged in criminal conduct, that statement in and of itself is going to cause constitutional crisis because we can't indict him and he can't clear his name. So we're not going there. And the last thing that Mueller talks about in regarding fairness is the concerns about the fairness of such a determination would be heightened in the case of a sitting president, where a federal prosecutor's accusation of a crime, even in an internal report, could carry consequences that extend far beyond the realm of criminal justice. Now, we do have, apparently, a caller from Boynton Beach.
Boynton.
What does it say? Does it say Adam or? I don't know what this
Adam,
says.
you're on. You're on.
Hi,
Ask a lawyer.
Adam, how can I help you?
Hey, good morning, Stuart.
Good morning.
First time listener.
Well, I'm glad you're listening. Thank you.
Happy to listen. I'm streaming you live. You sound great.
Thank you.
Listen, this whole thing about could a sitting president be indicted, regardless of who the president is?
Right. I'm trying to stay away from that because I know everybody has a lot of partisan feelings, including me.
Oh, no. Well, no. I'm not even getting at a partisan point of view. I know you said you wanted to stay away from partisan politics, so I'll stay away from partisan politics. I heard somebody on TV last night say that it's impossible to run the government from a jail cell.
Well, that's true.
That's why they don't do it.
Well, I can see that as being frankly, a simplistic explanation. It's true. If you're in jail, you can't run the government. Presumably, if you're in jail, Congress is going to have no choice but to impeach you and then the Senate to convict you. So you'll be removed. And even if you're not, perhaps the 25th Amendment will come into effect and the vice president and majority of the cabinet will certify that you're unable to conduct the duties of the office, and the vice president will take over as acting president.
Yeah, I saw some special on TV the other night about Nixon, and it's once the roadmap was delivered to Congress, even his staunchest supporters said, I don't remember who the congressman was, or a senator, I think it was, said they had no choice but to move forward with articles of impeachment.
Precisely. And the Mueller report talks about the Nixon case a lot. The Nixon case is interesting in that, for me, I was 13. Nixon resigned on my birthday. I thought it was a great birthday present. But the interesting thing about that was Nixon was brought down by a Republican Congress, a House and a Senate. His party turned on him when it was clear that he engaged in conspiracy and criminal conduct. Now, I'll be honest, again, I want to stay away, but I had hoped that the Republicans in Congress today would, at this point, look at the existing president and say, there are just so many things that aren't kosher. It's Passover tonight, so I'm going to say aren't kosher. Kosher LePesach,
That's right.
That they might actually, instead of being partisan, do what was done in 1973 with a Republican Congress and make an honest determination as to, is this person fit for office? Because as much as I might not like Vice President Pence becoming president, I'll concede at least Pence is a politician and understands politics, and that's not always a dirty word. And I figured, well, gee, the Republicans in Congress one day might say, oh, Lee, let's just get rid of this guy and let's put in, a politician. But I've been wrong, and what can I tell you? And I don't think this report is going to change Republicans' minds in terms of, getting rid of the president. But
time will tell.
Time will tell, and I agree with the comparisons. By the way, I'm being asked, do you happen to know a person named Lisa?
Yes.
Lisa Entile?
Yes.
Well, she's sitting right next to me.
Yes, I know.
You know? Okay. I don't know how that got out, but okay. Folks, by the way, this is my girlfriend, Lisa Entile. You can't see her, but she's here. All right. Well, thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
All right, have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, so now,
he talked about Nixon.
yeah. So does Miller.
I was really fortunate to have covered Nixon's return to California at El Toro Marine Air Station at the time, when he came home for the last time there. And that was something. It really
And
was.
I'll tell you something else about Nixon. Everybody who listens regularly knows I'm a Democrat, and I'm a staunch Democrat. Although there have been a couple of Republicans I voted for, not for president. And that's because of the appointment power to the Supreme Court in and of itself. But Nixon, who I despised, even at 13, with the ability to grow a little bit, have an opportunity to go to college and law school, reflect, as what happens with many presidents, I can at least turn around and say he was really good at foreign policy.
China.
Okay, absolutely. Opened up China. And that's the great thing, that if you could put aside partisanship, blind partisanship, keep the partisanship, but blind partisanship. Do more like Senator John McCain. If you can try to look at something from an honest perspective, you may find that there are aspects of people in the other party, whichever party you belong to, that you admire, or accomplishments that you admire and respect. And Nixon, who resigned under clear threat of impeachment and conviction in the Senate, I can say now, all these years later, when it came to foreign policy, this guy knew his stuff. Unfortunately, again, this is my partisanship now, with the individual presently in the White House, I don't think he knows anything about anything, of anything.
He's a construction guy.
Or is concerned about anything, or wants to be informed about anything, or cares about anything, except himself. All right. Yes, that is partisan, folks. So now, all right, so we've now established why the Mueller report says a sitting president cannot be indicted, and therefore he is not going there in the report. Now, what's that mean? That means that when you hear everybody proclaiming that Trump got a clean bill of health, hogwash. Hogwash. Mueller didn't go there. In fact, Mueller decided in one section to be really clear and tell you he wasn't going there. On Volume 2, page 2, he says, if we had confidence, after a thorough investigation of the facts, that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. In other words, well, we can't, indict a sitting president, but if we were clear he didn't do anything criminally wrong, we tell you that. But he goes on. And he says, based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. We can't conclude that he did not engage in a criminal conduct, therefore we're not telling you that. And he says, the evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Essentially now it's for Congress, the impeachment power, if they want to exercise it. And then the last thing he says in that section, on page 2, volume 2, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed the crime, because we can't, he says, we're not going there, it also does not exonerate him. So Mueller is going out of his way to say, look, if he didn't do anything wrong, we tell you. But we really can't come to that conclusion. And so while we're not saying he did anything wrong, we're telling you we did not exonerate him. Now, folks, you don't have to be a law school graduate to read between the lines. You don't have to be the Attorney General, who gave a really weird press conference yesterday, to read between the lines. His summary, his press conference, as many have said, at least on the news broadcasts I watch, it sounded like the criminal defense attorney for President Trump, not the Attorney General of the United States. In fact, he even used the word collusion. And Mueller goes out of his way in this report. Collusion is not a crime. There is no such criminal offense as collusion. It's conspiracy. Now, if you look at conclusion, if you look at a dictionary, collusion exists. The word exists. But it's not the crime. Collusion? You go look at the definition for yourself. There's collusion aplenty, up and in and out of the yin-yang. There's tons of collusion. But did that necessarily mean there was a crime? No. Not. All the meetings with the Russians, all the giving the polling data to the Russians, all the asking the Russians for Clinton's emails. No, we're not saying it equated the conspiracy. We're not saying it did it, is what Mueller says. But collusion? He says, figure it out. And what he actually says in the report, the word he uses, is the totality of the circumstances. Now, that's a legal term. What does it mean? It means, look, when you look at one meeting, you may not be able to come to a conclusion about the president's intent. When you look at another meeting, you may not be able to come to a conclusion. When you look at two meetings, you may not be able to come to a conclusion. But with the 20 or 30 or 40 things that Mueller sets out that Trump and his senior people did that weren't kosher, even Mueller says you can infer a malicious intent. Wow. That certainly doesn't sound like the president was cleared. Mueller is saying you can infer a malicious intent. But I'm not going to go to the next sentence and say that means the president was engaged in a crime, because I'm not allowed to. Under the Department of Justice guidelines, I can't. And I've already told you in the very beginning of the report, I'm not going to do it. So, that's really where we were left. Now, let's go to, I think, what is really a much more interesting question and a more difficult question, especially if we're going to try to attack it from a non-partisan perspective. And you may be surprised at my own conclusions here. Should a sitting president be subject to indictment? We know he's not, at least according to the Department of Justice. Maybe he is legally. Maybe if it went to the courts would say he is. Any president. But for now, the Department of Justice says no. Mueller says I'm an attorney of the Department of Justice. I'm following the guidance. And there are other good reasons to follow that guidance. If we can't indict him, let's not say certain things about him. So now the question is, forget that there is a President Trump, honestly. Forget it. Think of the president you like the most. Or actually, think of the president you hate the most, whoever it is in history. Should a sitting president be subject to indictment? Should Clinton have been subject to indictment? And I mean Bill. Should Trump? Should Andrew Johnson, the only other president to be impeached? Go through them all. Should they be subject to indictment? It's a much more complicated question. Now, we've talked about the foregoing concerns. Why a president is not, according to the Department of Justice, subject to indictment. They provide the basis for Mueller's opinion. Are those reasons sufficiently compelling for you, for I, for any other person in this country who has the right to vote, to say a president should not be subject to indictment? That either we should argue that the Department of Justice should change its viewpoint, or that a court should step in, or that Congress should push the issue. That's the question now. Should. Now, what happens if we decide we're going to abandon the binary choice of yes or no, and the answer for now is no? What if we abandon that binary choice and try to come to a more nuanced analysis and determination of the question. Could we and should we perhaps say that a sitting president may not be indicted for crimes such as obstruction of justice, but he should be subject to indictment for more substantive offenses, such as conspiracy, if one ever existed, and I'm saying what one does, but if one ever existed with a foreign power to influence an election. Now, I know that's the facts that we're dealing with here. But all I'm saying is, 20 years from now, the same thing happens and we have all the proof we need. Should a sitting president under that circumstance be subject to indictment? Or is the only recourse impeachment, where if the president's party has a 2/3 proof mechanism in the members, and they're not going to abandon him like they did in Nixon days, then impeachment is a joke. Impeachment is not a real fundamental political option, which the framers intended it to be. Because I think they thought that whether you were Democrat, Republican, back then they didn't have those labels, Federalist, Whig, whatever, that you would exercise your own honest, independent judgment, and it wouldn't be just whose party were you in. We have a call from Jeff in Port St. Lucie. Hi, Jeff. How can I help you?
Hey, Stuart, let us ask one question.
Sure.
What's the definition of indictment?
Indictment is the charge of a prosecutor or a grand jury as to a crime.
Okay. Now, what is a false indictment?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's no real definition of that. I guess a false indictment is not necessarily one which results in a not guilty verdict. I guess I would argue a false indictment is one where the prosecutor who sought the indictment had a malicious intent of his own.
Okay. So if we went and had a document made up that indicated a lot of false stuff, and then we want to indict him over that document or something that precludes to that document because I said, oh, shit, this is a bunch of bullshit.
Okay, we can't use that language.
Whoa!
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Back it up. I think that was some of the presidential words. Not
cockamamie baloney.
Okay.
Actually, that was a presidential word.
And I know you're referring to the dossier, right?
Correct.
All right. The dossier is not the issue here.
Well, but it is, because that's what started all this stuff.
Well, let's say the wrong thing started it. Let's say the wrong thing started it, but you still come to the truth anyway. Doesn't really matter. I mean, if let's say a president is guilty of rape, but a false issue started it, do you say then that you don't charge the person with rape when you know that from other facts, other investigation, that he's guilty of it? I mean, I'm not going to come to a conclusion as to whether the dossier, was or was not false. I'll tell you the same thing that I understand is it was reviewed 3 times by the FISA courts, 3 separate applications. They were applications of career civil servants. They were applications in at least a couple instances of people who identify as Republicans, and 3 different judges approved the various warrants that came out of the dossier. Was the dossier 100% accurate? No, not at all.
That document had been verified, and it hadn't been verified.
Well, it wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely false.
You got people there that, and the higher-ups that have been saying that. But, what I'm trying to say is, in England, if I sued Stuart just for, some stupid reason,
I'd sue you for malicious
prosecution. He gave me a peanut butter sandwich when he should have gave me a banana sandwich anyway. And we go to court, and you sue me for $10. Well, if you lost in that court trial, you have to pay me the $10 instead of, what I'm saying, if you're suing me for, what I'm saying?
If I sue you for $10, what I lose? What I'm trying to say here is,
if you start something that, I don't know, it just seems sort of weird, Stuart. You could tie up a president forever.
And that's one of the reasons that Mueller, that Mueller concluded that a sitting president is not subject to indictment. he comes right out and says the interference with the ability of the president to conduct his Article 2 powers is a serious issue. And therefore, the Constitution provides impeachment as an alternative method, and that's the decision at present of the Department of Justice.
So if you can't indict him, but you can impeach him, I mean, you know, obviously you
then
can't
the guy
impeach
stays.
me and you. Huh?
Then the guy stays until after he's no longer in office, when he's not free from not being indicted.
Well, that's because, you know, they drag this stuff out for so long, and you know as well as I do, some of these court cases go on forever.
Some do, but usually not involving a president. Watergate did not go on that long. Nixon's efforts to not give up the tapes did not go on that long. It got to the Supreme Court very quickly.
Right.
When you're having separation of powers issues, the Supreme Court gets involved very quickly.
Well, you know, it's like, it just amazes me that how this is, it just becomes a mess of cluster.
I do understand where you're coming from. I do.
Falsism, you know, and you know, just, I don't know.
There is always the defamation option, even in grand jury. If you give maliciously, if you intend to lie, then you are not protected. Your testimony for the grand jury, which is typically subject to a protection, a privilege, you lose it if you are intending to defame. You lose it in a regular court. You lose it if you give a statement to the police and you are maliciously intending to harm somebody. You can be sued for defamation. You can also be sued for malicious prosecution.
Like when that one congresswoman said, "Somebody, would you shoot him?"
Well, that's wrong.
Would somebody shoot him?
That's wrong. That's wrong. Okay, that's wrong. I don't care. Democrat, Republican, communist president. I don't care. That's wrong.
But nobody held her accountable for that.
Well, that's wrong too. Not going to get an argument from me. See, I was talking to my son yesterday, my 15-year-old son, and I've talked to him about this topic before. There is a difference between whoever is sitting in the office as president, between that person and between the office of the president. That person you may despise, you may not respect, you may want to spit on, but the office of president has to be respected. Otherwise, we don't have a country. Well, my kid said to me, if you saw Trump, would you curse him out? I said, well, if I saw him in at a rally, yeah, I'd curse him out. That's my First Amendment right. If I was taking a tour of the White House and he happened to venture outside the residence to greet people at this particular tour and it was me, no, I wouldn't curse him out. I'd say, hello, Mr. President. I don't like him. I'm respecting the office of the presidency.
Correct.
And in fact, White House counsel, former White House counsel Don McGahn, Trump assumed that he was his lawyer. He's White House counsel. He's my lawyer. And McGahn had to explain several times, I'm not your lawyer. I am the lawyer for the White House. I am the lawyer for the office of the presidency. My duty is not to you. It is to this office, because the office is separate from you or from anybody else who has sat in that office or will sit in that office. And when we start destroying our own institutions, whether they be the executive branch, the president, whether they be the legislative branch, Congress, or whether they be the judicial branch, the courts, or, as we in America call it, the fourth estate, the press. When we start destroying those institutions, the country will crumble. This country is not immune from falling by the wayside like most other countries in this world have already done, unless we stick to the framework of our Constitution. And they're fallible, but the wisdom of the framers, who set up a really great government, far from perfect. Oh gosh, far from perfect. But a really great structure that served us well for over 200 years. We can't let the hatred or disgust or dislike of one person in an office allow us to ignore the rest of our constitutional principles, our structure. And we can't let a person in the office, whether it's Trump or whether it's John Q. Public, condemn the media, condemn everybody else who attacks him or her, and let us all eat it hook, line, and sinker. Because we're doing a disservice to the fundamental aspect of our democracy. And we're going down the tubes if we do that.
The ball field right here, right now. It's sort of out of the park, but
yeah.
Why is it that people hate him so much?
Well, I'll tell you why I do. I can't answer for anybody else. I'll be honest with you. I'll tell you why I do. I don't think he's qualified. I don't think he's competent. I think that he appealed to a segment of the electorate that, first, some of it was racist. Okay? I think he also appealed to the segment of an electorate that wanted to believe, just like others in other countries have that went really far down the tubes, wanted to believe that he was the answer to the working man's problem, that he was going to represent them. I can understand that decision, even if I disagree with it. Hopefully 2 years later, they would see that they were wrong. I don't like him because he has executive time. What the hell is that? He watches TV. He watches the news. Now, does every president watch some news? Sure. But he sets aside hours every day to watch it. He doesn't want his briefings provided to him. He doesn't want to read anything. This is not just me. This is not just 1, 2, 3, or 4 people. These are dozens of people who have leaked information that he doesn't even want his national security briefings. He doesn't want to read them. He doesn't even want to hear them. He doesn't want to take the normal hour to deal with his national security team every day, where they report to him all the hot spots in the world and what we may have to pay attention to today, tomorrow, within the next week. He doesn't seem interested enough. That's why I despise him. He doesn't want to learn. There was a lot of people that believed, okay, he doesn't have any political experience. He got himself elected. Now that he's elected, he's going to take it seriously. Oh, my God. No, I'm sorry. In my opinion, he doesn't take it seriously. He doesn't care. He doesn't try. When he goes on the international stage, I'm sorry, in my opinion, he's a buffoon. We don't have respect around the globe anymore. Our allies don't respect us. The Brits look at us like, how the heck did this happen? The French don't respect us. The Germans don't respect us. He attacks all of our allies, and he praises people like Putin and you know, His Royal Highness in Syria. He praises autocratic dictators, and he complains about the limitations of power in democracy. That is why I despise him. I mean, I know it's not just for you, but I hope I'm being clear. I hope I'm not just giving a silly little reason. I hope I'm trying to express why I and maybe a lot of people don't like this guy. That's the reason. Those are the reasons. If he tried, I might dislike him. If he was interested, I might just dislike him. If I didn't agree with his policies, which I don't, I might just dislike him. Like, you know, I haven't been thrilled with some of the other Republican presidents, but I could see where they did well, too. Even Nixon, as I said. I don't just dislike Trump, I despise him. I think he's a buffoon.
The one thing he's done well is Israel.
Well, no, I disagree, and I'm Jewish. I don't think
okay.
I'm sorry. I don't think he's done well with Israel. Even though he has been a strong advocate of Israel,
okay,
I don't think he's done well with Israel. I think he has harmed Israel. I think he has created more problems for Israelis in trying to pursue peace with the Arabs and with their neighbors by emboldening Israel to believe that we will now support any crazy thing they want to do. That is the level of his support with Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I've liked, I've disliked, you know, he's right-wing, But to me, sometimes you need to be right-wing in Israel when you have enemies on all sides. So, it's not like to me a right-wing, president in our country. Sometimes, I agree with that in Israel. But he has given Netanyahu carte blanche. And Netanyahu has run with it and run with it way too far. And Israel, which used to be able to say what you want about us, but we treat the Arabs in our country better than their own country, their governments treat them. We have moral authority. We do the right thing. I love Israel. I mean, tonight's Passover. I love Israel. I'm a Jew through and through. But Israel can no longer stand in the international community and say that everything it does has moral authority, because it doesn't.
Ooh, okay.
And that's not all Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But Trump has allowed the existing government there to believe that we can do whatever we want because we're going to have the support of the president no matter what we do. And I think that's caused problems. So no, I don't even think he's done well with Trump. And I think I forgot in my going on my tirade that we have John, I think, still on from West Palm Beach on tour. Are you there, John?
Yes, that's okay. Peaceful Passover too.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I made you wait so long.
No, I enjoyed listening. I have a question. I know you're not an expert on condominiums, but you do know.
Yes,
have
I
a lot
do.
of knowledge
I do work on that, yes.
Yes. And I want to ask you, I always hear about electronic voting for elections, and I wanted to get your opinion on that. But before
Sure.
you answer that, don't you have to have a website set up for that to take effect?
I'm not familiar with the rules and the regulations for electronic voting, whether it's a condominium, homeowners association, mobile home park. They all have different chapters within the statute. I would assume, but I'd be guessing, honestly.
That's okay. But do you have an opinion on it?
Yes, I think electronic voting is great as long as there are enough safeguards to ensure that the people you want to be voting and who are eligible to vote are the ones that are voting.
And that's just it, the safeguards. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what kind of safeguards would be implemented to make sure that happens.
Well, I would think
And
that perhaps you could send out, codes, distinct codes to people that are authorized to vote so that they have to sign in with their code when they're going to the website, let's say, to access the ballot. That might be one way. I'm sure there are other ways that, I won't think of right off the top of my head. But
if we ever needed a recount, wouldn't that run into the same problem we had when we went to electronic voting machines a few years back, and then now we're getting rid of them again?
That's a very good point.
The touch screens.
It's a very good point. I mean, back in my day as a kid, I remember when I'd go into the voting booth with my parents, and even when I first started to vote. It wasn't a paper ballot, but it wasn't an electronic ballot. It was a manual type of machine where you pushed a lever, and the lever created something. The technology's beyond me. But apparently that was pretty reliable.
Punched out a ballot.
Okay. Apparently that was pretty reliable. But then technology, and we start going away from that little lever system, to what we now have. And you're right, what we now have not only is subject to mistakes and electronic issues and hacking. I would be in favor of trying to come up with a nationwide standard for voting, not state by state, but a nationwide standard for voting where we can be readily assured that the voting is protected and secure.
Yeah, well, you got to be able to recount. I'm going through my own condo election now. I've looked at it once. I got to go back and look at it again, but I'm finding numerous errors. And if I didn't have all that paper in front of me, which I'm not crazy about, but at least I have it,
right.
I wouldn't even know how to go about fixing the problems with an electronic voting system.
Right.
But thank you for listening.
You're very welcome. Thank you for calling. I appreciate it. Did we have another caller over there?
Yes, we do, as a matter of fact. And we'll get him on the line right now.
Okay. I think we have
another
John. Dear John.
Yes, it is. I'm John.
Hi, John. How can I help you?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that you handled the first caller's questions
Okay, John, can you get off a speakerphone? We can barely hear you.
How's that? Better?
Hello?
Better for me. I can hear
Can you,
him.
Hello, John.
can you hear me?
Yeah, barely, but go ahead.
Well, I can barely hear you, too.
Well, I'll speak louder. I'm known to do that.
Is that good?
I can hear you much better.
Okay. I'm back on the speakerphone. Anyway, when Trump campaigned and I saw what he was saying and doing, that's when I decided that I couldn't vote for him and should not be president. But as you say, he represents big business, a lot of people who hate minorities. I have a lot of friends who are retired military, and they support him to the end. And I hear the way they talk about people that are not just like them.
Right.
And it's a pretty sad situation. He's an egotist. He's a control freak. And he's not a statesman. He's a businessman.
I would agree with you on all counts.
Yeah, that's where he should be. Now, I'm not going to walk home alone if Greg Wyatt is behind me. I'll tell you right now. He's my Republican friend.
Well, see, I had a lot of dealings with Donald Trump in the old United States Football League days. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
he was one of the.
Boy, he really won that case big, didn't he? He got $1.
Oh man.
Oh wait, excuse me. It was trebled to $3.
The $3. That's right.
Big success.
Anyway, it's a funny thing. I have an ENT doctor, a nice guy. And I've been going to him for a few years. And he saw me on Facebook, and he's always grading my paper. He's right on my case if I say anything negative about Trump. And I told him, I said, I'm going to block you if you keep.
That's a shame, and that's what's happened with this presidency. It's almost like the Civil War, friend against friend, brother against brother. People have decided, really if you like the guy, I won't talk to you anymore. If you don't like the guy, before I had this lovely girlfriend and I was on dating profiles, I read so many profiles of women that said, no Trumpers. We've never had that before, where somebody was so divisive that people would go to those lengths. So I just think it's a crying shame after we've elected our first African-American president.
It's worse than discussing religion.
It is, yeah.
And
anyway,
I don't think any president has divided the country as much as he's had, probably since the Civil War.
It's possible Abraham Lincoln did, but at least I think he did it for the right reasons. And he's been borne out. He has this really, really big monument in D.C. to him.
Stuart, the last good Republican.
I don't know if I'd go that far because other Republicans have done good things.
I'm kidding. I voted for local Republicans because I met them, I knew them, and they were kind of middle of the road, and they did a good job.
Anyway, I have a few minutes left, and I do want to sort of sum up here. So
Okay,
I
all right,
thank you for your call.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Don't go to the theater with Lincoln. Oh.
Right. All right. So I do want to. We're not going to never get to the obstruction stuff, but do that another time. I do want to sum up on this. Should a sitting president be subject to indictment? And where I sort of was, should we be more nuanced? Should we say that a president could be subject to indictment if he commits a substantive crime that violates another provision of the Constitution? Should it be, if there is a conspiracy with a foreign power, should he be subject to indictment? If he violates, let's say, the emoluments clause, that you don't have a personal gain from being president, should he be subject to indictment? My initial reaction was yes. Let's carve out the right exceptions, have Congress legislate them, and let's make it clear that a president is subject to indictment for these types of offenses. But then, as with many things, when you try to be a lawyer, and you try to really analyze it, same thing happened in college and law school. I wrote a paper on what's called group vilification. Should you be able to stop speech from certain hate groups because you know exactly what's going to happen, like at Skokie, Illinois. And I tried twice in college and law school to write a paper that argued that there should be a distinction and you should be able to carve out in the First Amendment. I failed both times. And even failing was good. Got A's on the papers because I was able to acknowledge that it would be too much risk that a judge could misinterpret and misapply, create their own views. And I think possibly the same thing would happen here. If we tried to have what is ordinarily good, a more nuanced view, as opposed to black and white. Yes, you can, no, you can't. Well, what would happen? Would one Congress say a president can be indicted for this, and then it would be changed by the next Congress? So it's all political? Would there be a standard that a judge would have to interpret, and one judge might interpret it one way and another judge interpret it another way? Is that really how we want to determine is a president subject to indictment while in office? So I'm not done with my inquiry, I'll tell you. I mean, I'm inquisitive. But I'll tell you right now, my instinct says, as much as I've hated it for 2 years, my instinct says that the Department of Justice determination that a sitting president is not subject to indictment is a good one. I hate it in this instance, but my gut says it's a good one, it's a logical one, it's a necessary one. If Congress would be more dispassionate and forget that they're Republicans and Democrats and just look at facts and make determinations, I guess impeachment could be a real process. It's not now. So I don't know what recourse anybody has. But we'll talk about this, not next week, I'll be on a cruise, but the week after, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this and a little bit about, can Congress regulate obstruction of justice of a president? And for now, we're all going to hear a lot about the Mueller report for the next couple of weeks. You're going to take your sides. God bless you. You have your rights. And we'll talk again on Ask a Lawyer. I thank you for listening. I thank you for calling. And I hope you have a great weekend. Call Cheryl. God, if I don't mention Cheryl's name, call Cheryl. 781-8003. Thanks. Bye-bye.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie. WPSL on Alexa and Google Home worldwide.